Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Nelson with TUG, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's TUG Connects 365 program. As you settle in and get ready to start the webinar, let me give you a brief introduction for TUG, the usergroup.org, for both our current members and those of you who represent organizations that have not yet joined our online community of in-board distribution software users. Now, we've all heard the phrase knowledge is power, and I can say with confidence that after today's presentation, you'll be waking up tomorrow with a little more of both. Today is but one of our in-depth presentations. TUG webinars, online forums, and member events facilitate the timely exchange of ideas and information to help you work better and with more confidence. That is a powerful combination. If you're currently a member, it pays to get more involved, and if you're not, please visit our website to discover why 2,300 heads are better than one to help you be the best at what you do. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today David Garcia, IT Applications Supervisor from First Supply, who is going to take us into a deeper dive in Q&Ds today. David, I'm going to turn this over to you and say that it is all yours, my friend.
Thank you. Let me get my screen sharing. If you can confirm my first slide, quick and dirty programming with 4GL.
You are in our sightlines. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome everybody to Quick and Dirty Programming in 4GL. This is the second installment of two Quick and Dirty Programming webinars that I've been presenting for. My name is David Garcia, Application Supervisor at First Supply. I've been in IT for quite a few years, 20 years experience with in developing in particular with Progress, both in a character environment as well as Web UI. And for reference, we are running a Web UI on-premise solution since April of 2018. And currently we are running on the version 11.20.4, and we aim to update our environment every 2 to 3 times a year. So we are constantly trying to stay as current as possible. But we are talking about Q&Ds today. Q&Ds, I will have to start out this meeting or this webinar with the disclaimer that this webinar presentation contains information which may be considered confidential to your organization, and access to some of this information could cause damage to your data if proper precautions are not taken. None of this information should be considered an endorsement or recommendation of any kind. The presenter and TUG take no responsibility for how this information is used. Last time we were more talking about creating reports. This time we will be getting into actually updating records, importing data from a table or from a file. So last time we were dangerous. This time we are even more so. I would like to remind everyone, please do all of your development in a test environment. I can't reinforce that enough. You want to make sure your program works properly and successfully in some form of test or sandbox environment before you actually execute anything in the test or the production environment. It's best to test it out in that test environment first. Important fact number 2, and you may remember this from last time as well. There is no single right way to do this process. There are better ways and there are worse ways. So I am presenting as a part of my webinar the approach that I feel works best for me to make sure that my Q&Ds function efficiently and effectively, and that I have all of what I would consider my safety procedures in place, especially when performing updates to our database. My outline for topics that I am touching on today. Right at the beginning, I will be touching on temp tables. We will be talking about record locking, obviously, since we are doing updates. Data input, whether we are just straight updating records, whether we are performing it from an update, as well as we will touch on table buffers. The last big topic that I have is going to be converting a report into a report screen. For those Q&Ds that you actually want to be able to run from SX.e as a report screen itself. But first, time for a poll. Looking to find out from everybody level of experience. So Gloria, if you could activate that poll. And we will give everyone a chance to answer the questions. Obviously, updates are a big thing for people to want to be able to do in environment. It's definitely a good skill to have once you build enough programming experience and are comfortable with the language to get in there and perform those tasks. And if you're talking, Gloria, I can't hear you.
Oh, no, I just popped up your results on the screen. So you can go ahead and take a look at those. I know that you wanted to jot notes down the last time of the percentages to gear your presentation.
Trying to find that that information.
Yep, it's showing right on the screen. I can give it to you with an audible.
Okay.
We have 0%. We have 0% of what's progress for GL.
Okay.
18% of seen a few Q&Ds. 23% written simple Q&Ds. 45% written multiple Q&Ds. And 15% written entirely new interfaces for SX.e with 3+ years.
Sounds good.
So I'm hiding those results now for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So good to hear the breakdown of our attendees. Sounds like everybody's had at least some level of experience and worked with them for a little while. My presentation does assume that you have had some experience with working with Q&Ds and I've seen them before, so that code doesn't look crazy. So today's focus, yes, is updates. But before we get to that, I want to talk about temp tables, particularly talking about listing and sorting records, being able to compile amounts, and being able to, and how they can also be useful in building outputs. So as I pull up my editor, I'm going to pull up an editor and at least be able to type up some code so that can see some of the programs that would have actually been written. Temp tables are a really beneficial tool because they allow for you to be able to accumulate data into and sort data without having to build it directly into a for each statement or and convoluting some of those programs. Temp tables, just in order to define one of the best other things about temp tables is it behaves just like a table within the progress database. Once you have it defined, you can do for eaches on the temp table. You can do finds on the temp table, but it's basically a multi-dimensional or an array of records. Just the easy way for defining a temp table is to define temp table. I always prefix my temp table names with TT dash just for naming conventions, because if I'm going to be doing something that has to do with data in the customer record, ARSC, or customer records, I'd like to have some naming conventions consistent, but if it's going to have ARSC in the name, I want to make sure I'm not naming anything that is remotely related to a database table name. So within defining a temp table, then you define what the fields are. So field custno, and I can define it just like a variable, like ARSC custno, or if it's a accumulator, I might define it as like I want to count like as an integer. Another big benefit of temp tables is the fact that you can define a index for or multiple indexes. So index will give, you have to name every index, K custno as primary and custno. So when I populate this table, any records that I put in here, I can, when I output them later on, it sorts it automatically by customer. Say we had another field where we wanted to see the ship via records or ship via fields, and we were going to store those. Sorry, like ARC ship via. Eventually, we'll have a program that goes and populates each of these fields for each record, and we can have a second index. Okay, ship via, like AR, and the field ship via. So when we output, we just identify which index we're going to use, and it automatically sorts it by that. Now, there are, say you wanted a whole bunch of different fields in ARC, but you didn't want to have to type in the 50 or 60 different, what's it called, fields. You can actually define a temp table like a table itself, and it'll automatically have all of the tables, fields, all of the indexes automatically as a part of that temp table definition. One of the handy things about that is also you could add your own indexes and define and have it sort them by something completely different. Now, I'm going to, in terms of accumulators, I quickly wrote a program in like 5 minutes before this meeting in which I defined, I was looking to say, I wanted to have a temp table. I wanted to know for a particular date range in time, what all of the customers that had invoiced sales during that period of time, what ship vias were used during that time. So my query, I go and cycle through all of the invoiced records for, in this instance, 3 days worth of time. I have, so the for eaches. I'm displaying it just so that I get some feedback so I know it's flying through the records. In this instance, I'm using the quick temp table that I defined at the top for custno, ship via, and an account of orders so that I go and find a record. If it doesn't exist for that customer in ship via, I create one, and then I tally the order count. I increment the order count by 1. By doing that, the last thing I do is that I output the temp table contents that has now been accumulated. So if I run this real quick, it flies through all of our orders real quick, and we have a list of how many orders and each of the different customers, all of the 3 ship vias. If I wanted to output it by a different index, maybe I want to do index ship via, K ship via, and we'll use ship via custno. Now we have a different index. For each, use index K ship via. Now, when we run it, now they're all just output in the ship via order, and each one is sorted, and you can see them in that order. So it is a very versatile tool that comes in handy, and I have reference of using temp tables as a part of some of the updates that we are going to be discussing in some upcoming slides and programs that I'm going to display. I do want to emphasize one thing, that a temp table, defining a temp table, if we define temp table TT ARSC like ARSC, we're defining it like the table, but it is an empty instance in memory. I want to make sure to call attention to that compared to defining a buffer for ARSC, which is a reference back to the database table name. So that is like pointing to the database table name, and that is quite a different thing that we want to make sure not to get confused. So before we move on to now getting into creating update programs, whether there are any questions about temp tables that we wanted to touch on. And I'm not hearing any questions from Gloria, so I'm guessing we have no questions at this moment in time.
Oh, sorry, we do.
Okay.
When using a temp table, like table, can you use the same field names without defining them? Is that the benefit?
It is the benefit if you do a if you do a TTARSC like ARSC, it automatically defines all of the fields and the formats of those fields to correspond to the definition of that table itself. You could actually define one temp table
And I have
define it
one
like
additional
another.
question.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I interrupted you. Did you have a thought you wanted to complete? I apologize.
Just that you can, even if you have one temp table, you should be able to also define a temp table like another temp table if you, for whatever reason, needed two of the exact same format.
Okay. So if we are copying fields from a database record to a temp table record, is there an easier way than typing in all the fields in that list?
So if you're going to, let's quickly go back to my buffer. So when you're creating in this instance, when I create the record, say this was just created like the ARSC table, you could do a command called a buffer copy that would tell it to copy all of the contents of the record in the database table record over to the temp table record. So that using one command quickly will replicate all of that data from the database table to the temp table record. Any others?
Awesome. That's it for now. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. One other came up. Just as I was going to say, that's it for now. What is the advantage of using a temp table?
Progress is a very flexible language and has options of being able to sort by records as you're doing a for each, or as well as accumulations and so forth. But in my perspective, when you start wanting to sort by fields that aren't otherwise directly indexed in a table, or if you need to do accumulations where you're doing multiple different queries across with different criteria in order for the program to be efficient, having the ability to build a table of the data that you're ultimately trying to, whether it's further accumulate or output as a report, it greatly improves that response time to just be able to toss it into that file and into that temp table list so that you can then manipulate and total or subtotal later on after you've found all the data you're looking for.
Great. That concludes the questions from this break. David, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. So building an update program. My steps for building an update program basically comprise of the following three steps. One is that I build the query, the query to retrieve the records as a report. Just no updating, no locks. Just like if you wanted to report, create a report that just listed the records that you're planning to update. Step 2 of that is to actually have it generate an output file of those records, which I deem an audit file. It's beneficial to have that audit file so that A, you know precisely what records are going to be updated when you complete your update program, and B, you have a fallback program or file that lists, here's all the records I updated. So in the off chance somebody comes back to you and says, I need all those records switch back to what they were before, you now have that file that will give that answer. And then finally, the third final step is actually to modify the program to actually lock the records and update them. Got ahead of myself. So my first update program. So step 1, I just create a program that is generating the report. As you can see on the screen, this is a pretty straightforward and simple little report. Say the request came in saying this person, GACO, is no longer with the company and all of his customer assignments in ARSC are being reassigned to another customer. Well, my first step is just to build a simple little program that outputs. This is pretty much my step 1 and step 2, where I have it where it retrieves the records. I can see that it'll show me the customers that are being updated, and it's also going to, so shows on the screen listing the customers, and I'm using a stream 1 for actually listing into a file what customers are being updated. So if I ran this, I'd have both the screen. Let's check our syntax, no lock. And so if I execute it, actually it executed. So right now I'm just hitting spacebar and you can see the numbers going by. We just add a pause 0 so that it goes quickly. Actually, it went so quickly you didn't see them all. So step 1, I know that if I went out to now this directory, I would have a text file that lists all of the dozens of customers that are currently assigned to JACO that are going to be updated. It's a good way to audit to make sure your program is working successfully and that it's going to target all of the accounts and only the accounts that you expect to target. So after you have your program, your report program working as you expect it to and targeting the records that you want it to, that would be then within the test system, the moment where you now provide the updates to the code to allow for to update the records. 2 primary changes, we go to an exclusive lock. Exclusive. Now, the difference between an exclusive lock and a no lock, when you're creating a for each, you should either be using one or the other. And in 90% of the times, you should only be using no lock so that you are guaranteed that you're not updating the record. You only make it into an exclusive lock when you are ready and prepared and expect to be updating that type of record. Now, down here, I had added code because to make sure I had enough time to talk today, I added a single assign statement. This assign statement within Progress is how you assign the new values. It's just an assign statement is a means of grouping multiple assignment statements. We could have each one of these lines be a separate command. ARSC sales rep output equals STWA, period. Opera init equals DGAR, period. Each one of those, if we keep them separate, are a separate command to be executed by the program. By making it an assign statement, it kind of shortens the execution time of the program to consider all of those assignments as one single command to be executed against each of those fields. So if there's ever more than one assign statement that or field you're assigning, it's recommended you use an assign statement for all of those. So in this instance, I have it assigning to the new sales rep out is going to be STWE. And because we're talking about SX.e, they have opera init fields to identify who updated it last, when it was updated last, and what process was used to update it. So I am in the habit of also updating those fields to make sure it is recognized that it was a Q&D by me that executed the task of assigning those values. So if I went and ran this, which I don't actually want to update his sales rep out initials on all those records, this would fly through those and lock all of them and assign the values to the new value. So in a nutshell, that's about how easy it is to mass update records from one old value to another new value. We can get into now more complex processes of building an import process. Building an import is where you have an Excel file and or some type of delimited file that you have, somebody's compiled the list of here's all the accounts that I specifically want updated and here's the new value that I want them assigned to. So in this process, my steps are that I first build a very simple program that'll just import the data into the program so that I can read and review the data. I will modify the program and enhance that program so that I can store and validate that imported data. And then finally, when I know that, okay, my import's working successfully, I know I'm doing all of my validations and the data's in there, then I use that import data to actually retrieve the database records and update them. I think I just, from current slide. That was, there we go. Sorry about that. Get my editor back. So for an upload, now we start getting into streams again. Streams are not just output, they're for input. So we have to define a stream. I named it S-in because I'm going to be using it as an input just because for ease of reference, it's just like a variable name. Input stream S-in, and here's my file that I'm importing data from. Now, the text file that I'm importing from is a tab delimited file that has tabs between column 1 and column 2 of data. I could actually open that field, open that record, and show you what that file looks like. arscbo.txt. So it's a tab delimited file that I imported over onto this this system, and it just has column 1 is all customer numbers, and column 2 has zeros and ones. So when you're importing from a stream, you use a repeat block. The repeat basically is going to be used to cycle through each line that is in that import file. And the import command tells it to go and retrieve the next line of data. So my convention that I use is that I import the entire line of data in an unformatted state into a single character field. This V input is a character field. That just, so it pulls it in, tabs and all. Now, my next statement that I perform when reading in an input file is that I use an assign statement to set variables for each of the fields I'm going to be intending to break out of that string of values. So in this case, the first field is a cust.no field. So I'm grabbing the first entry from the v input field, and the delimiter is v tab, which that is a tab character that I stored in a variable, so that I can say the delimiter is a tab character, and I'm storing the second field just as a character field in that variable. I do this with a no error on the assign statement. This no error, without it, if say you imported a record from that file and there's something that you're trying to assign to a decimal and it's a alphanumeric field, it's going to generate an error. Well, we want to actually capture that it knows that there was an error and report back to it, so that I know that it's actually behaving properly. So right there off the bat, it saw the headers and says, oh, there was actually an error in the file. And then it continues on and is able to read, and now the variables are showing that we have values. So step one, make sure you can import the data from the lines and break them out into their respective fields. My second version takes it from where we were to now, instead of just assigning it to a variable, this is where I start using temp tables in my import process. So I defined a temp table that, instead of just the two variable names, now has the two field names that we are importing. So I import just like I did before. Now I'm creating a temp table record, and I am assigning the temp table records fields based on the two fields in the data. I still have the same error messages, but now I've enhanced it where I now have another stream in which I output the errors to that stream I output the original input data that we imported in the first place into that output error stream, so that I have that as a reference of, here are records that errored out that have a problem with something about trying to read it. So if we needed to correct things, we now have just a subset of the errored messages. I added additional code to also keep track of, if there's an error, let's keep a count of how many errors, so that if there is an error, we can just say, and I'm done, I'm leaving the program. So that's my phase two of, I'll toss everything into a temp table of the records that are being imported. Now, when I get to the final phase, I end up with, so I have my input stream from the data file. I have my error stream, which is the when they fail to import, like the decimal doesn't convert. And I have my export stream has been added. My export stream is just like in the other program, where I now have the ability to output the record pre-change, so that it doesn't end up, so that if I need to revert it, I have a record of what the pre-change value was. So I'm importing, I'm creating the temp table information, I'm validating that there weren't any problems in storing it. If there were errors, in this case, I'm saying, hey, there's errors, I'm going to leave the program. If it makes it beyond that point, then now I have my temp table that I could loop through, and I can filter out any ones that don't have a customer number, or maybe I wanted to target them based on some other criteria. And as I loop through the temp table record, I go and find the associated customer record that I'm planning to update. If it finds it, then here's my pre-change output to a exported data pre-change file. I give myself some feedback so I know where we are in the updates. And I actually also put some controls around it to whether or not I actually want to update or not. I have a variable that toggles that on and off. And then I have, if it's in an update mode, I will assign the variable based on what was input and update the trans date, trans time, and operand fields saying, yep, I'm the last one to update it. So that, in a nutshell, is how I generally structure my Q&Ds for doing imports into a program using a file, or into the database using a file. I'm assuming there may be some questions, so opportunity for questions.
Yes, we do have some questions that have populated. The first question is, can we get a copy of scripts that you are using for your work?
The Q&Ds that I have here, I can see about providing copies of them based on, I will heavily emphasize back to my disclaimer that it is a buyer beware, that I would desire for you to understand and fully comprehend what the program is doing and not just assume that poof, it's done, that it'll cooperate for you without proper review and testing.
Okay, and the next question is, in a multiple for each statement where we get updating only one of the database tables, DB tables, in that for each, do I need to include exclusive lock on both for each or the one that is updating against?
So the only table, if you are only updating, so you're talking about like when you join, so you do a join between, say, ICSD and OEH. If you're only updating the OEH table, you should only have an exclusive lock on the OEH. Now, that will, one of the topics I had mentioned was record buffering. If in general, I wouldn't recommend doing a for each and then update everything. In that you would then end up with record scope or scopes of how long records are locked for. Generally within a for each, I would recommend that you do a find to find the record that you're planning to lock, and so that you can scope the transaction so it's only locking that one record at a time and not locking all the records on the table.
And
we can
that
talk
may
about
lead
that.
into the next. Sorry, I was going to say that might lead into or have already answered all or part of this question. Is there a way for each exclusive lock to skip a locked record instead of waiting on the lock to release?
And right, that would end up being, if you're looking to skip a record as a part of an exclusive lock, I would generally recommend writing the program so that you are only, like, whether it's the query to say only retrieve the records that you actually truly want to be locked, or you make the query where you do a no lock, and then when you determine this is an update, a record to update, you use a find using a buffer for that record so that you can exclusive lock it then. Or you can use a temp table to build your list of records, and then you cycle that you know you're going to update, and then cycle through those to lock so that you know all those records are going to be the ones you're locking for the purpose of your update.
And we have one other question here regarding this topic. Do you have an example of an update or an import that has gone wrong, or as I like to paraphrase it, has gone sideways?
While I can't pull one up specifically, I've had my challenges of times where I've had to revert records because somebody didn't give me the proper criteria, which running those in tests and making sure users review those is pretty vital. I've had another instance where I built the for each and I had it all ready to go and operational, and like I believe it was ran it based upon a date index where like the trans date index or some value that was actually updated as a part of the transaction, and now it would pick up the record, and then it would pick up the record again because it fell in the list further down the line, and then it got updated again and pushed it further down the list. And so you need to watch out for that type of scenario with some fields. I will also caveat other points of updating records, especially when you're updating like primary index fields. I cannot recommend considering doing that. If you're going to try to update a product ID field, I would not actually touch that with a 10-foot pole personally, because just updating the order number, or the product ID, if you update that in ICSP, you also have warehouse records for that product. You may also have order records for that product. You have sales history for that product. You have all of these other tables that you need to really think about. Is this field on this table something that should be updated in this manner? If it is something that really is going to affect not only that table, but you have other historical or referenced records that are related to that field. Okay.
Sounds
I'm
good.
off my soapbox on that.
That's okay. We like you being on your soapbox. You can go ahead and get back into the content. Those are the questions that we had that populated thus far.
Okay. So I'm looking at my clock real quick. I recognize we identified 40 minutes. I'm sorry, I can be a little long-winded, so I hope everyone is bearing with me. Converting a report to a report screen in SX.e. So my bullet points on the screen are the basic steps that I follow if you are looking to create a report screen in SX.e. You build the report screen as a Q&D with input variables. From there, you have some configurations in SX.e, and I do have some screenshots and slides coming up that cover these bullet points, but for ease of reference, have them on the screen here. We do some configurations in SASM, SASSM, and SASSR to actually make the screen come into existence as something report screen you can run. We adjust the Q&D program from the first bullet point so that it reads records from SAPB, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. We adjust the output to write to the default stream, and then we compile the code into the source. So that's 1 second. Where did my... So in my screenshots or in my programs, so we have this GLZRP program, and GLZRP is a report screen. As many of you are aware, within WebUI or SX.e or whether you're running character or GUI or any of those versions, there are standard report screens that all have the same interface that use options, ranges, and maybe input lists in order to run, and they're schedulable, and so WebUI provides that entire interface, and you just need to be able to write the backend program to support to be able to be supported by the front end parameters that we set up. So here's my phase 1 of this GLZRP program that is a tab delimited version of the data that a GLRBP would generate. So in what I wrote, I've got Kono defined. We've got a stream going to an Excel file because it's going to be tab delimited. A bunch of variables. Look at that. We've got another temp table of all the different fields that we're planning on outputting. A couple of indexes that are handy for sorting purposes and retrieval purposes. Now, in my program, we have an update statement. So this Q&D, if I executed it, would pop up a little screen and say, okay, what's the beginning warehouse and ending warehouse? What's the beginning division number and what's the ending division number? And you'd enter those values, you'd hit F1, and it would go and retrieve all the records that met the criteria. Jumps through a few processes. And of course, I'm using a temp table here because it's handy to be able to just toss it, do the one step of accumulating all of those records into the temp table, creating a temp table record with all of the parameters. And then at the end, I zip through that temp table and just do a unformatted put stream and put all of the columns in a tab delimited output. In order to get this to a format that a report screen can work with, we do a few simple little things. Actually, let's go back over here. First thing we do is there is a include prptbeg.i. That include is basically a little subfile of code that is a standard part of Infor's backend processing code, and it defines all of the variables required for a report screen to work. Now, by defining that into this, one of the variables in there is Kono, gkono. So we don't need gkono in there anymore. So we get rid of that. The other thing that we need to do to define is, well, with a report screen, you want, in general, for it to go to the if you're going to put print to a file or print to email or send it to a printer, you want it to go to the default output stream. So instead of using a stream, we get rid of the stream. So that's two changes. Third change is instead of an updated statement, we don't have user input anymore. We now have variables that are fields that that are in the database itself. So we have the variables that the program uses. We need to assign those. When you have a stored job in SX.e, there are SAPB records that store what those settings are for the options and the ranges. So we have the SAPB range begin, and it's an array of values. So we'd have range begin 1, SAPB range begin or range end 1, and then range begin 2, range end 2. There's another field in SAPB for options. I think it's OPT value, and it's also an array of all of the different options that you would use. So I'm not going to type the other two in there, but you would basically do that, where now here's the updated process where here's range begin 1, end 1. In this instance, division numbers are integers, so we actually need to convert the value because SAPB stores all of those as in a character field. So if it's decimal, it would have to be converted to a decimal. If it was a date, you'd have to do a process to convert it to a date. And the last thing we would have done was, instead of the stream output, we just put it as to the default stream by not identifying a stream, and then it goes to that default stream that you identified in the report screen. So taking a Q&D to become a report screen is really just, you build it out, you make sure it works, and just a few tweaks of how you get the variables to set based on input from the table, from the SAPB table. And now I mentioned getting the code into the compiled library. So for web UI, if you're on-prem, I recommend that you create a separate zip file for each of your separate projects. It makes it easier for if you plan on modifying them later, you don't have to, or if you plan on pulling one out and no longer needing it in a compile, you can pull one single zip file. Because Infor uses zip files to contain all of their source code. They number their zip files 0001, 0002, and if you take additional changes, they will continue to number those up sequentially from there. So I recommend starting your numbering scheme for your zip files at like 100 or something up there, so that you don't run into any clashes and you know your files come after the Infor standard files. In that zip file, you will have zipped up, here's my primary directory, GLZRP is the name of my directory for that program. Inside that directory, I have a Chewy code directory, and inside that Chewy code directory, I have an I directory and a P directory. That is the standard format that they expect the content within the zip file to be, so that when all of the zip files are unzipped and compiled, it combines it all appropriately. Infor has a particular directory for all the delivery zip files. This file would just go in that directory with Infor's zip files. And the next time you do a compile and push of code for web UI, that code is incorporated into that compile and push and is included so that it is available for the screen to use. Now you have the code in place. You have the code that is ready to accept variables. I recognize the screenshot might be a little bit small, but it is showing that SASSM menu screen option for the GLZRP setup, just to define, hey, here's this GLZRP screen, here's the name for it. It's a report screen and the report name that is going to be associated with it. You set it up in the one spot in the menu items, and that's the SASSM screen you configure. And then the SASSR screen defines what those input parameters are that it's going to ask you in the report screen. You've got a ranges choice, you've got an options choice, and you have a limit of 20 of each. So plan accordingly when you're deciding what variables you're planning to have it constructed with. And I think that is, I recognize I ran through a lot of that really quickly. I'm sure if you have additional questions of how to get a report screen built from a Q&D, feel free to ask questions. We're at a Q&A point, and I will also have some contact information available after this slide. Any questions currently?
I had to unmute myself again. I always forget to do that. I think this might be a typo, but I think the question is, how do I save? It says, how do I have a custom report support? But I think it means, how do I save a custom report entering a list of orders or customers?
Entering a list of customers. So there are programs, there are if you look at some of the screens in that Sasser's configuration, there are choices for options to say enter a list of customers, and those options actually identify a separate program that is used for inputting lists of customers or orders or something along those lines. From there, it is just a matter of doing a for each against a particular table that program uses to store those values. And maybe you do that for each where it then pulls it in and populates a temp table that you have in your program to store that list so that you now have that list within your program to cycle through and generate your output.
Wonderful. I have had a number of people throughout the session post on the question panel as to whether or not this session would be posted from a recording. And the answer to that is yes. And because we're dealing with people in the CSD path as well as SX.e users, it will be posted to both boards and is typically available the following business day. So you can not only refer to that if you want to take another glance and look at something, because somebody just posted, David, and said, this is a lot. Will there be a recording available? So I just wanted to touch base on that and let them know, yes, that there will be a recording available. So
we could talk for hours and hours.
I know you could talk for hours and hours. So David, what is the best way? Do you have a slide with people if they want to reach out to you via either phone or email that you can put up?
I have my email address here in the green in the middle, same slide from way at the beginning. So if I'm sure there may be some questions out there or observations. I know I went through a lot of that really fast. I'm hoping that with maybe some repeat views, some of it may benefit as well as provoke more questions, and that's what we're here for, to answer those.
Wonderful. David, first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing your expertise again today. This was a very deep dive. Whoops, we've got some things that are populating here. Ben says this was great. Thank you. You're welcome, Ben, on behalf of David and TUG. In one of your examples, you use OEEL and OEEH. How do you join tables in the same Q&D?
So we can, basically you can nest for each statement. So you can do a for each OEH based on your criteria, no lock. And then within that, you could do a for each OEL where OEL company number matches the OEH company number, where the OEL order number matches the OEH company number or order number, and the order suffix equals the order suffix between the two tables. I know that's in a nutshell. It's probably easier to see it visually, so feel free to shoot me that email and I can at least do a little demonstration of what that would look like.
And David, you're getting lots of posts with shout outs of thanks, as I will definitely be rewatching these videos from a number of people. So on that note, I want to say, yeah, please be careful. That's once again the disclaimer and the proviso. David, thank you again for sharing your expertise today in this deep dive. And don't forget, the TUG forum boards are a great resource for your peers to post questions and get switch solutions to daily operational challenges. And as with most all of our webinar content, this presentation, as I shared, will be available on our TUG website no later than tomorrow for your viewing. And also, we'd like to invite all of those of you who are members of TUG to continue this discussion in the online forum in Cloud Suite Distribution and SX.e. And for those of you who are not members yet, please visit www.theusergroup.org and join us today. Again, thanks so much for being with us, everyone. We value your time, and thanks for joining us for TUG Connects 365. And on that note, as they say in Hollywood, that's a wrap, and have a great day. Bye now.